At Arm's Length, Episode 10. Alex was on his way to pick up Gabrielle, having been unable to sleep for most of the night. If there was a bullet lodged in the wall, it was the proof they needed that a crime had been committed. He decided to speak to his friend on the force and get him to look into it. He had no idea what could be found, but he strongly believed that something had been covered up all those years ago. They would have to investigate, but it would be done in a quieter way than if they did it themselves. He was not one to unnecessarily put himself in danger, and the last thing he wanted was for something to happen to Gabrielle. He decided to call on him that evening and ignore the fact that she had been against that idea. The other reason he had found it difficult to sleep was because of what Gabrielle's grandmother had said to him the previous evening. When her granddaughter had left the room for a moment, he had caught her studying him intently and smiled at her. "I've been around for a long time, you know. You should tell Gabby how you feel." "I don't understand. She's in a relationship with someone, as she has explained, and yet you are here. You know, if she marries this fellow, Gabby won't leave him should she wake up one morning to find that she is hopelessly in love with you. You will have lost her forever. So now is the time to act if you have anything to say. That is what courtship is for, discerning if you want to spend the rest of your life with someone. She needs to make a choice. Does she know she has another option? Are you willing to step aside and let things be?" Her eyes had pierced him, and the words "the rest of your life" had kept repeating themselves in his mind like a broken record. Alex came to the realization that he found the thought of that scenario quite unbearable. It was uncharted territory for him. He had never told a woman that he loved her before. He hadn't felt the need to. "Hi! How was your night?" Gabrielle asked. "I barely slept. I read the letters again, and I am so nervous. Meeting this man that had such an unhealthy obsession with my mother. I have no idea what I'm going to say to him. I brought the letters with me, in case they are of any use to us." "I think we need to be calm. Introduce yourself and see what happens," was his reply. She bit her lip and nodded. Alex did not understand how Paul was fine with not knowing what his girlfriend was getting herself involved in. He was definitely going to speak to his friend that evening. She could get as mad as she wanted to, but he preferred her alive and not speaking to him than any other scenario. "I saw online that the branch of your airline is near the hotel. Maybe you can show me around afterwards?" she asked. "Sure. I told them I was in Benin, and the manager said they would love a visit, and we could go over some issues," Alex replied. "Weren't you thinking of stopping by?" She looked at him in a strange way. "I hadn't given it much thought. We have weekly conferences with our branches at the head office, but I might as well pop in. We're here. Are you ready?" The woman closed her eyes for a moment and nodded. Alex thought that if he didn't know what she was thinking, he would never have guessed by looking at her. She looks like a woman of power, a very beautiful one. She held his hand for a moment and she was shaking. "I am sorry. I just needed to steady myself for a moment." "I am good now," she said, letting go of his hand and making a move to get out of the car. He touched her arm to stop her. "You don't have to do this. I can." "No, you can't. And I have to. I need to." Not one more word was said, and a few moments later, a secretary led them into a very expensively decorated office. A big man in his 60s was sitting behind the desk, and he got up to shake Alex's hand. "Mr. Jacobs, I was very pleasantly surprised that you requested a meeting. My family and I use your airline frequently and highly recommend it to our guests," He spoke to Alex, yet his eyes did not leave Gabrielle for a moment. Alex was very glad that he had come, as he did not like how the man was sizing her up. She offered her hand and he took it, holding on to it until she pulled away. "I am Gabrielle Ibrahim. I am here because my friend wanted to meet you," Alex clarified, and the man offered them seats across the table from him. "What can I do for you, young lady?" "I believe you knew my mother a long time ago," Gabrielle replied. "You'll have to be more specific. Is this some kind of paternity claim? You look vaguely familiar." "Sophie Ibrahim," she replied, observing the man intently. He had been sporting a grin that immediately turned into a grimace, and he looked away for a moment. "Sophie Ibrahim? Sophie Ibrahim? No, I don't think I know her. Should I? That's funny, considering that you spent days on end parked in your black Mercedes outside our home, spying on her," her eyes not leaving his face as she uttered those words. "What nonsense is this? Mr. Jacobs, can you explain?" the man asked, visibly annoyed. "She just wants to ask you a few questions about her mother. I assured her that a man of your social standing would be most cooperative. I believe you wrote her some letters, like this one." Gabrielle offered it to him. He took it and read it, visibly agitated. "You see, my mother disappeared soon after, on the 13th of July to be exact, and I wondered, seeing that you were frequently stationed in the vicinity, if you saw anything strange that day that could throw some light on what happened." "I did not. I have no idea where your mother is. Now, if you could please leave, I have another meeting." "You were seen trying to force her into your car. You offered her staff money to keep you informed of her movements. I have enough to go to the police and make them take a closer look into the matter," Gabrielle said, her eyes still fixed on him. The threat of the police evidently got him thinking. A man like him probably had a few skeletons in his cupboard. He took a deep breath and forced a smile, yet the effect was even more sinister. "I admit, I had a small crush on Sophie. She wasn't a difficult woman to look at. I was unmarried, but she wasn't. A circumstance that didn't seem to matter to you," Gabrielle interjected. "I was young. One does foolish things at certain ages. I'm glad now someone saw me and intervened the day I grabbed her, as I hadn't thought things through. They were just idle threats. I am sure Mr. Jacobs here has had similar experiences," he said, winking at him. "I can assure you I have never forcibly tried to take a woman anywhere. You were heard saying that the next time you would not be alone. Can you tell us where you were the day she was last seen?" Alex asked. "With my wife. You can ask her if you like. This is the address of her shop." He wrote something down on a card and pushed it towards Gabrielle. "If it wasn't you, maybe you saw who took her. Maybe you noticed something out of the ordinary, or someone watching the house. Is there anything you can tell us to shed some light on what occurred?" Gabrielle asked him. "Do you honestly think that I would see someone take her away forcibly and I'd just sit back? He stopped himself and looked at them. It felt like he was miles away for a moment. "You loved her," Gabrielle said softly, and he fixed his gaze on her. "I did. Like I've never loved anyone before. I remember you. I would watch her across the metallic wire that served as the fence as she played with you in the garden or read to you. I asked her to come away with me. She looked at me as if I was speaking to her in a foreign language. You, I would not have taken. We would have had other children. Then she suddenly became more friendly and agreed to go out with me. I found out later that it was her sister pretending to be her." "When did you find out?" Alex asked. One day after school, I was watching out for her and I saw them together. They were having an argument. I pretended like I didn't know. I thought I'd use the information to my advantage, meet up with her sister, use her to lure Sophie out. But the next time I met up with her in our usual restaurant, she didn't come alone. She told me if I didn't stay away from Sophie, some kind of accident would befall me. That woman was not Sophie. There was a coldness about her. She did not make idle threats. I can't believe that you stopped and gave up just like that. You don't seem to be the kind of man that would allow himself to be intimidated by a woman, Gabrielle said. Like I said, she did not come alone. When did you last see my mother? I can't remember the date now. It was so long ago. All I remember is that one day she was there, and after that, she wasn't. You guys moved away soon after. But perhaps you need to look closer to home if you suspect something happened to her. Your father had a temper. He broke my nose. Oh, I can see by the shock on your face that he didn't reveal that minute detail to you. He came up to me and said that if he ever saw me there again, I would regret it. Maybe things got out of hand at home. They had an argument. And what? Gabrielle asked. And she left him. She was an enlightened woman. Her father was French. She wouldn't have tolerated any form of domestic abuse. And leave me behind? I don't think your father would have allowed her to take you with her. That's your theory? You haven't wondered after all these years what happened to her? If you thought she'd left my father, why didn't you go after her? I mean, if it didn't bother you that she was married, it wouldn't have that she was a divorced woman, right? I fell in love again with the mother of my son, and I married her. I see. Well, thank you for your time. May I have the letter back? She reached out for the paper he had kept under a folder, and he unwillingly handed it to her. Gabrielle and Alex left the office in silence, not wishing to say a word until they were outside the hotel. What a sinister man, she exclaimed, frustrated. I don't want you to ever see him alone, Alex said, observing her seriously. I don't intend to. I'll go and see his wife in the shop this evening. I think it's better that I go alone. Sure, I have to do something too. Now, how about a tour of the offices, then lunch? He asked her. I thought you'd never ask, she replied, laughing. Alex glanced at her as she shivered involuntarily. He hoped she would pay heed to his advice and not go on her own to see Steve Egosa. Gabrielle walked into the boutique. It was the kind of place that sold a bit of everything, from hairpieces to dresses, shoes, bags, jewelry. There was a sales girl behind the counter, and she walked towards her, waiting her turn as she was attending to a customer. I was expecting you. Turning around, startled at the sound of a female voice, she came face to face with a woman in her late 50s, dark-skinned, plump, and very heavily made up. It felt like she was trying to break the world record for wearing the most accessories at the same time. There were numerous bracelets on both wrists, more than one hole in each ear, which were occupied with earrings, several rings on her fingers, and a number of necklaces. Gabrielle could not say exactly how many, as they were intertwined. She tried not to focus on her makeup, as it felt like all the colors of the rainbow were represented on her face. My husband told me you'd be paying me a visit. I just wasn't sure when. You seem not to be a woman that likes wasting time, as here you are. Why don't you come this way to my office? We can have some privacy there. Thank you, she replied, and followed her into a crowded small room that barely fitted a table and 2 chairs. It doubled as a storage room as there were boxes piled one on top of the other, fabrics wrapped in individual bags, shoes, bags. Do sit down. The woman pointed to the only place she could do, so as she openly examined her in a thorough manner. So, you are the daughter of that woman. I am. I went by your husband's office to ask him some questions, and he gave me your address so I could also speak to you. My mother disappeared 27 years ago, and I'm trying to talk to people that saw her just before it happened. I was told you had some sort of altercation with her. Wait, so you think I did something to your mother? And why did you wait all these years before searching for answers? The woman stared at her unflinchingly, and Gabrielle made a split-second decision to tell her the truth. I was told that she was dead. I only found out recently that she disappeared. Your husband showed a very unhealthy interest in her, and you evidently didn't like it. If you were me, wouldn't you be sitting exactly where I'm sitting now? It was difficult to read the expression under all that makeup, but suddenly the woman let out a laugh. I like you. You have guts. You came all the way here, into a small room with only one escape route, to speak to a woman that you think may have killed your mother. Some people will term that as stupidity, but I don't think you are stupid. She eyed Gabrielle shrewdly. I have to know, but I also have someone keeping watch outside. It has been agreed that I will come out to wave at him in 15 minutes. If I don't do so, he's been instructed on what to do. This is not a secret meeting. People know I'm here. And this bag may have other uses aside from the evidently decorative one. A GI bag. You must have a powerful friend. The woman winked at her in a knowing way. I am Gabrielle Ibrahim, which is what GI stands for. For the first time, the woman exhibited genuine surprise and remained speechless for a moment as she processed the information. The Gabrielle Ibrahim? Things have suddenly taken a very interesting turn. You know, I wrote your office to ask if I could sell your bags in my boutique, but I got a very polite refusal. Apparently, I'm not high-end enough. We have stands only in certain exclusive malls in London, New York, Milan, Paris, and South Africa. Our main stores is in Lagos. We just like maintaining certain standards, controlling what is sold and how it is sold, Gabrielle replied. I see. Standards that people like me don't meet. Gabrielle got up and picked up one of the bags wrapped in plastic from a nearby shelf. Removing the wrapping, she threw it on the table. No, you do not meet the standards. This is a very bad copy of my work. Mrs. Egosa, I could have you arrested for this. Well, I just got them today and haven't sold any yet. You can't blame me for what's circulating around or for taking advantage of opportunities that come my way. Technically, as there hasn't been any exchange of money, I will let it go, if none of the imitations of my work out there can be traced back to you. Excuse me, I'm going to let someone know that I'm still alive. I suggest that in the meantime you take out the 4 bags that are on the shelves in the store. Gabrielle walked out and made contact with Peter, who she had told to be on the alert. Somewhat of a spy movie enthusiast, after being reassured that he was not in any danger, the man had agreed to be on the lookout. She went back to the office after making sure that the offending bags had been removed from sight. The woman was sitting in the same place where she had left her. Now, Mrs. Egosa, can you please tell me when you last saw my mother and what you were doing on the 13th of July 1993? That's a very specific date, and as I'm sure you can understand, there's no way that I could possibly remember what I was doing so many years ago. As to when last I saw your mother, Let me think. Gabrielle observed her as she frowned, trying to remember, or pretending to remember. She was a difficult woman to read. Look, I don't know when I saw her last. I only know that she was different, a real threat, and I needed to watch her. Steve and I had been childhood sweethearts. We were in different secondary schools, but the same after-school private academy. We would sneak out of our houses to see each other, especially as my father had a no-dating rule until we were out of his home. When I was 18 and about to enter university, I discovered I was pregnant. I had passed the cutoff mark to study business administration, and Steve gave me money to go and see a doctor friend of the family. He told him about the situation, and the doctor had agreed to help us. But when we got there, and I was lying on the examination bed, waiting for him to come back to start, I saw the instruments laid out, and for some reason, the image of my baby sister being brought home by my mother from the hospital flashed before my eyes. I felt sick, got up and dressed quickly, running as fast as I could until I got outside the building. Steve ran after me, yelling for me to stop. We had a terrible argument, and he warned me that he would deny the baby was his if I didn't go through with it. You know, it was easier to say that then. People didn't just go and get a DNA test, so it really was his word against mine. I didn't know how to tell my parents. My mother was buying furniture and non-perishable provisions for when I would move into the university hostel, roughly a month from then. We were a middle-class family. We got by, but not with a lot to spare. I was the first child. My father had been so proud, telling his friends that I had gotten admission into school, as some of the children of his peers hadn't been so lucky, or had to enroll on courses they didn't want to study, but had lower cut-off marks than their first choices. People were accepting anything as nobody wanted to spend an extra year at home with resentful parents, constantly reminding them of their failure. But after 6 pregnancies and 5 live births, my mother was no fool, and one morning I found her observing me gravely, and I knew she knew. She screamed at me, shouted, cried. Years later, I came to understand that beneath her disappointment, her tears were for me. My father was furious. I stayed outside the house when she told him to keep well out of his reach. He was not a man to have his cane far away when he got angry with us. I slept outside the house that night, afraid to go in, but he didn't ask me in either. My mother gave me a blanket to keep me warm, some food and some water. The next day, I saw him drive out. He didn't even look in my direction. I went in, had my bath, and left the house in the direction of Steve's. His mother was home, as was he. I told him that I'd spent the night outside my house, and that I didn't know what my father was going to do to me. He said he'd given me a solution and I'd refused to take it, so he couldn't do anything more for me. I lost it then and screamed at him. This was something we'd both done, and I was paying for it alone. I was going off to university like nothing had happened, and his idea of helping was taking me to a clinic and waiting outside, whilst I did something that I knew would haunt me for the rest of my life. His mother heard me shouting and came to see what was going on. She caught the last part of the conversation, but then, on seeing her, Steve denied knowing me. He said that I had a reputation, that I probably thought that pinning it on him would secure me and my child a meal ticket for the rest of our lives. I knelt down to beg that woman. I told her that it wasn't true, that I was also about to start my university education, and this situation was not at all good for me either. Am I boring you? I just felt that it was better if you got the whole picture. The woman made a pause in her narrative to ask the question. Not at all. Please continue, Gabrielle said. I find that knowing more about the past helps us understand what every person has become and what they are capable of doing. Well, she asked Steve to leave us alone, and then offered me the one solution that at that point I knew I couldn't take. I shook my head and got up to leave, but she asked me to wait. She went to her room and came out with an envelope which she handed to me. She said that under no circumstances was her husband to find out about the baby. After the birth, if the child was indeed Steve's, she would help me, but I was not to come to the house again. She would find me. So I went back home, clutching her envelope, and stayed outside, waiting to see if my father's anger would subside. I spent 1 week like that, sleeping on the porch and going inside when he left for work, my mother pleading with him all the while until he finally said I could come in. For as long as I live, I will never forget the look he gave me, and he warned my two younger sisters that if they ever fell into disgrace like I had, that they would live to regret it. Of course, that was the end of me furthering my studies. I stayed at home, my father not speaking to me, and when my son Charles was born, the test, as expected, showed that he was Steve's son. I named him Charles after my father, and though he barely spoke to me, he did dote on his grandson. Steve's mother gave me money throughout my pregnancy, and after the tests, she said she would open a shop for me near the market so I could earn a living. So, when Charles was 4 months old, we went there daily. I spent hours and hours in that shop, selling what you see here on a smaller scale. I would travel to neighboring countries, buy goods, and sell them in my store. When Charles was 5 years old, Steve finally came to meet his son. He said he would provide for all his needs, that he would go to the best schools in the city. He made a lot of promises. Weren't you resentful of the way he treated you? Walked away? Gabrielle asked. At that point, I was past all that, but I told him that he had to put things right with my father, to go and see him, and that he agreed to do. My father looked at him and asked what kind of person would turn his back on a pregnant teenage girl and leave her to face everything alone. He said he was sorry, had been very young, but that when he finished school and got a good job, he would come back and pay my dowry and marry me properly. When he left, my father spoke to me directly for the first time in all those years. He looked at me and asked if I was sure that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with that kind of a person. I don't know that I would have. Why did you marry him? For a number of reasons, but I felt that he owed me a family and that marriage would put everything right. I waited and waited for him to keep his promise. What he did was put us up in an apartment and buy me a car, but he continued his single life. Even when it was evident that he could take care of us, he still didn't keep his promise. I knew that he had a string of girlfriends. He was from a wealthy home and of a marriageable age, but when your mother came along, it felt different. He told me that he would marry her. I was furious. Charles told me that he gave him notes for him to deliver to her. He pointed her out to me when I went to pick him up from school, and of course, I had to tell her a few things. She was walking with a man when I stopped my car to have an amicable conversation with her. She told me that she was married and wanted nothing to do with Steve, that he was the one following her around and making a general nuisance of himself. I warned her to stay away from him if she didn't want to find out what I was capable of doing. Was that the only time you saw her? No. I decided to follow Steve and make a scene each time he saw her. He hated being embarrassed in public and knew I had no problem using my lungs and vocal cords when necessary. I wanted him to know that he couldn't discard me for a second time so easily, I was not going to allow it. I saw him parked outside her house a few times, so I made sure he found it impossible to remain there. So maybe you were both there the morning she disappeared, Gabrielle looked at her, hope in her eyes. We were nowhere near wherever you're talking about. Look, I am sorry your mother is gone. Her going away benefited me, as it was then, after 15 years, that Steve married me. He put things right. Maybe my father wasn't smiling in any of the wedding photographs, but we recovered some sort of relationship, and that meant the world to me. But I will tell you something, because I like you. Even though you've put a stop to my bag sales, you will not find your mother alive. I suggest you bury her and everything pertaining to her, once and for all. That was all she said? Sandra asked during their conference call that evening. Yes. I asked her a few more questions, but she refused to tell me anything more. There was just a certainty about the way she said it. Look, I am not naive. I know that is what the outcome of all this will be. It's been a very long time, and the gunshot, but it felt like she knew something more. Anyway, since she clammed up, I had no other choice but to leave. Alex, what did you get up to this evening? Are you free tomorrow morning to come with me to see my father's former associate? I had to see a friend. I can't tomorrow morning. Can't you go in the evening or the day after? The man replied. No, don't worry. I'll be fine. Peter, after overhearing a good number of telephone conversations, has been sworn to secrecy, and I am paying him extra to keep an eye out for me should things get difficult. I really would feel better if you waited for Alex, Sandra said. You really don't know who you're talking to. You might have already spoken to the murderer, and that person will probably get nervous. I am careful, and Alex has things to do, which is fine. Oh, Paul's calling me. I'll speak to you guys later. I went to the police today. Well, to a high-ranking friend of mine. I told him everything, and tomorrow morning they are going to examine the wall and see if there's any evidence of foul play. I called her father this evening, and he told me where the furniture in question was positioned at the time of the crime. They are going to ask the landlord if they can go into the house without a warrant, as that will take more time, so we are hoping he'll cooperate. There was silence from Sandra after Alex revealed what he had been up to after Gabrielle had abandoned their conference call. Gabrielle's going to be mad, but from a legal point of view, you're doing the right thing. It needs to be done through the proper channels, and if evidence is found, it will be handled properly. She will be, but she's also putting herself in danger and weighing up the consequences. I'd prefer she gets angry with me. You do realize that by telling me, you've made me an accessory to your crime and that you'll transfer her anger to me. I am actually helping you, Alex said. Should you have to act legally regarding the case, you can't be accused of anything. Don't worry, she can be mad at both of us. And if she has to make a choice, you'll be back in her good graces before me. I'm just a guy she met a few weeks ago. True on both counts. I've had a setback and can't travel until next week. If you can't stay in Benin, we can get the phone number of this Peter guy and see if he can keep a close eye on her. I didn't like what you guys told me about Steve after your visit to his hotel. I can stay. I'm also going to hire a security firm to tell her and keep an eye on things. I've been recommended one. Thanks, Alex. That makes me feel much better. I don't know if I want them to find anything in their search or not. Assuming that vase disappeared because it got broken, There might be a bullet embedded in the wall, and that would be extremely helpful to the case. By the way, changing the subject, please tell your friend Mark that I am not in the least bit interested in him. He keeps texting me. Why? After me and Nnamdi, he's the best of us, Alex teased. That's very reassuring. I get the third best of you lot. I am just not into the whole dating thing now. And if I was, I'd like it to be with someone with some kind of direction in life, like Tom had. I am sorry for your loss, and you shouldn't date until you're ready. That must have been very difficult to deal with. It was. Still is. He was just a really good person, and I don't want anyone to replace him. I can't even think about it. I know people get back into the dating scene and life goes on, but it just isn't something I'm considering at the moment. That's understandable. But just so you know, beneath his nonchalant attitude, Mark's a very nice guy. Being around Gabrielle has made me realize something. We got so used to being handed everything, women included, and somewhere along the line, we lost the ability to appreciate people. It feels like for the first time, in I have no idea how long, I am seeing past having someone pretty next to me or simply having a good time. It feels like this opportunity will just pass me by without my being able to stop it because of what I represent to Gabrielle, and also because she's not open to looking beyond Paul. I see it in my friends too. The girls that will challenge them, irritate them, annoy them, make them laugh, make them love, are the ones that will require them to work, and they won't take them into consideration because there will always be someone easier to deal with that comes along and requires very little effort. My advice is that you get to know Mark as a friend. The worst that can happen is that you remain that way always, and seeing that you're not looking for anything else, it really isn't such a bad thing, is it? Profound and unexpected words from someone like you. I'll think about it. Call me and let me know how it goes tomorrow. I will. Good night. Despite the efforts of her mother and aunts, Sandra had not wanted to get to know any of the eligible men who had been introduced to her. It irritated her that people decided when her mourning period was to end, or when they said things like, "You're so lucky you hadn't gotten married yet when your fiancé died," like that fact could lessen her pain. Someone who had been in her life for so long, who had loved her, accepted her faults, the way she would ask the waiter to have her meat cooked, for example. She did not like any part of it to be pink, and Tom had even sent a few plates back to the kitchen when she cut into a steak and looked disappointed at the bright pink color, not wanting to be difficult and make a fuss. Or getting her daisies for no reason, knowing how much she loved those flowers. Those little details had made her feel loved, protected, and comfortable, like she never had with anyone else. She wished her mother would understand that. It wasn't just about getting married. It had been Tom that she wanted to marry. But it was no use trying to explain things to the older females in her family. So she had resorted to not picking up their calls too often, because after asking how she was, the next question would invariably be whether she intended getting married that year. Alex made it sound like the ball was in her court, like she was not to feel pressured and could just get to know Mark. And that was not as off-putting as the men her family was shamelessly parading before her, expecting a proposal a few months after a meeting. Her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of an incoming message, which was from Sabine. Sabine just texted me the address she sent Samuel's letters to. I forwarded you the message. It's a village on the outskirts of Benin. Not very big, so you should be able to locate the family house easily. How was your call with Paul? Thanks a million. I'll ask Peter to go and see if he can find the house when he leaves me at the company of my father's former associates tomorrow. The call was good. He's been buried in work lately, and he's putting in a lot of extra hours. What did he say about what you found out so far? Sandra asked her friend. I didn't want to burden him. He sounded really tired and just called to hear my voice, which was rather sweet of him. He must have sprained a muscle from the huge effort he made when he called you, Sandra retorted in a sarcastic tone. Why do you say that? Gabrielle asked. No particular reason. Please be careful tomorrow. And remember that that man threatened your mother. Call me as soon as you're done. I will. I promise. Sandra, thank you so much for being here for me, now and before. And always. Where else would I possibly be? She hung up, wondering why someone as intelligent as Gabrielle would actually be considering settling for Paul. To stay up to date with my latest episodes, make sure to subscribe to this YouTube channel by clicking the subscribe button and hit the bell for notifications.